Charlie Chaplin kept the small box in his vault unopened for more than 60 years. It wasn't until his grandson broke the lock in 2022 that anyone realized what was inside. What he discovered stunned him. Supporting evidence that Chaplin was living a double life and deceiving everyone, including Jay, in addition to being Hollywood's biggest celebrity. Edgar Hoover. His suspicions were valid, but for all the wrong reasons, according to the FBI. What Chaplin was actually concealing for all those years is now being revealed to the world. Born in 1889, Charlie Chaplin grew up in one of South London's poorest neighborhoods. His family was virtually impoverished. Hannah, his mother, worked as a nurse and sewed garments in an attempt to make ends meet, but it was never enough. Charles, his father, was a music hall entertainer who left the area. Charlie's father had relocated to New York by the time he was a toddler, and his parents had divorced. Hannah was then left to raise Charlie and his older half-brother, Sidney, alone. Moving from one dilapidated flat to another, they were barely making ends meet. Despite being expected to assist, Charlie's father did not provide any assistance at all. The family quickly fell farther into poverty despite Hannah's best efforts. And then it got worse. His mother suffered a breakdown when Charlie was 6 years old. She was unable to care for them any longer. Sidney and Charlie were transported to a workhouse, a facility for the impoverished, but it wasn't a nice one. The boys were taken from their mother as soon as they got there. They were treated more like inmates than kids, had their heads shaved, and wore flimsy uniforms. The boys were transferred once more after a few weeks, this time to an impoverished children's school outside of the city. Particularly the day he learned to write his last name, Charlie distinctly recalled it. He believed it to be him. Somehow, Chaplin. However, he primarily recalled the depressing and isolating nature of those years. His life was harsh and icy, and it left a lasting impression on him. The situation at home didn't improve. Hannah had another collapse in 1898, which led to her being admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Physicians thought it was due to sickness and starvation. The boys were briefly sent to live with their father, whom they hardly knew. But neither of those things lasted. Because of their father's heavy drinking and the state of the house, child welfare officials had to intervene. After returning home for a while, Hannah's mental state began to deteriorate once more in 1903. Charlie, 14, had to walk her to the hospital by himself. After she was returned to the asylum, Charlie was left to fend for himself. Years later, he recalled a painful experience. "If only you had given me a cup of tea that afternoon, I would have been fine," his mother assured him. He was troubled by that little, odd sentence for a long time. For the majority of the following 10 years, Hannah was in and out of institutions. Despite living in California with Charlie in her latter years, long after he rose to fame, she never entirely healed. Charlie's father passed away when he was only 38 years old. From illnesses brought on by drinking. By the end, he was broken alone, although he had previously been a famous performer. But he had helped Charlie land his first stage gig before it all fell apart. Charlie began dancing with the 8 Lancashire Lads when he was 10 years old. This group of clogged dancers traveled throughout the United Kingdom. Before his first performance, he spent weeks practicing. Before taking the stage, he was frightened. He was captivated by his performance, though. Charlie Chaplin started his journey to fame out of desperation. After his mother was sent to a mental institution, he was left to fend for himself at the age of 14. He joined a London-based theatrical agency in the hopes of landing any job he could. Instead, he discovered a watershed. Harry Arthur Saintsbury, a theater manager, saw something in him and offered him the part of Sherlock Holmes' Billy the Page Boy. Even though the role was modest, Chaplin made it stand out. Between 1903 and 1905, he traveled around Britain, and his brilliance was noticed. He was acting with William Gillette, the most well-known Sherlock Holmes of the day, on a big West End stage by the age of 16. He was lauded by critics. And crowds adored him. More significantly, he learned discipline from Saintsbury, which helped him manage his innate talent and make it a career. However, solid labor was short-lived. Chaplin began performing with Casey's Circus, a small comedic group that specialized in burlesque, in 1906. Despite just being 17, he immediately made an impression. Clever but not crude, he had a talent for physical humor, and his impersonations were charming and nuanced. Every performance the group gave in filthy, little music rooms across England served as a teaching moment for timing, movement, and audience interaction. When the tour concluded in 1907, Chaplin was already a growing figure. Still, he had another setback. A failed solo act and months of unemployment put him back where he started. In 1908, his fortunes turned once more. Sidney, his older brother, who was already employed with Fred Carnot's comic troupe, assisted him in obtaining an audition. Charlie initially struck Carnot as being too timid and weak to be hilarious. However, Chaplin disproved everyone's assumptions once he took the stage. He immediately obtained a job. By 1910, Chaplin was traveling the country in vaudeville shows with Carnot's best team. He created the inebriate swell, a drunken gentleman who was one of his most well-liked characters. The crowds adored it. He was regarded as one of the greatest pantomime actors by critics. At the moment, Chaplin was unaware that influential individuals were observing. One of them was Max Sennett, the founder of Comic Films and the head of Keystone Studios. An unusual telegram inquiring about a man named Chaffin or something like was sent to Chaplin during a performance in Philadelphia in May 1913. In the end, that was the start of everything. Chaplin arrived in Los Angeles that December with a new Keystone contract. At the age of 24, he earned over twice as much as he did on stage. In an attempt to orient himself in the unfamiliar realm of silent film, he checked into a hotel downtown. Slapstick jokes and crazy chases filled Sennett's studio. Only a camera and a vague idea were present, along with no writing. Chaplin felt overpowered. He soon wrote to Sidney, pleading with him to visit California. He talked about the lavish money, the gorgeous women, and the sunshine. However, Sidney took some time to settle in as Charlie's manager after his arrival. Rather, he became an actor himself and took a role as Reggie Gussell with Keystone. Charlie had to work things out on his own for a while. Sidney did eventually succeed Charlie as his manager of the company. Together, the two brothers started to construct one of the most successful film careers ever. A humorous tiny man wearing loose-fitting trousers and a bowler hat first appeared on the movie screen in early 1914. It appeared in the 6-minute movie Kid Auto Races at Venice, which was filmed at a real kids' race in California. The man's interference with the cameras was causing annoyance for everyone. The audience was unaware of their involvement in the film. The man was Charlie Chaplin, whose tiny tramp persona had been created only that morning. He assembled the suit using whatever was available. A tight coat, floppy shoes on the wrong feet, 2 large slacks, and a small mustache to allow his face to still display emotion. It was only his second film, but something clicked. He was constantly being watched. The persona, according to Chaplin, was more than a clown. He was a poet, a dreamer, and a recluse who, despite having to steal candy from a baby to make ends meet, nevertheless had faith in romance and adventure. The world had gotten what they called Chaplinitis by the next year. His image was used in stores to sell toys and clothing. He was the subject of songs and comic strips that imitated his style. Chaplin received more than 140,000 votes as the favorite actor in a British magazine survey. At the age of 26, he had already become the first worldwide cinema star. His power came from his achievement. After creating numerous short comedic films at Keystone Studios, he quit to join S&A, which offered him a huge pay increase. There he began to transform. His films had emotion now, and they were no longer merely ridiculous. He made people laugh in The Tramp, but he also moved them. It was an early indication of the character's deep concern for other people and a portent of things to come. Then, in 1916, Chaplin made an unexpected contract signing. The Globe. The Mutual Film Company paid him $670,000 annually, which was the highest salary ever earned by an artist. That was more than $1,800 a day, or more than $12,000 a week. According to one reporter, Chaplin earned enough money in 2 seconds to cover the cost of a streetcar ride. In addition to money, the arrangement granted him his own studio, complete authority, and working hours. The manner he desired. Chaplin's 12 short films over the next 2 years demonstrated his progress. Fast-paced, silly comedies like The Floorwalker were his first works, but by the end, he was crafting poignant, rich stories like The Immigrant, which ended up being one of his favorites. In The Vagabond, he skillfully blended humor and melancholy, making it seem more like real life than a play. These movies moved viewers on a deeper level than merely making them laugh. Charlie Chaplin was already among the world's most renowned people in 1917, but he wasn't content. Mutual, the film studio he worked for, was preventing him from moving further. Thus, he took a risk. In exchange for $1 million for just 8 films, he signed a new contract with First National that allowed him complete control over his work. At the time, such a sum of money was unprecedented in Hollywood. More significantly, he was able to retain half of the income and the copyright to his films. Using some of that money, Chaplin purchased a 5-acre orchard in Los Angeles, located at the intersection of La Brea and Sunset Boulevard. He purchased the property for $35,000 and converted it into his own private film studio. He also resided on the land, in a 10-room home encircled by fruit trees. The studio was operational by the beginning of 1918 and furnished with all the equipment he required: a film lab, offices, and editing rooms. Even now, his footprints may be seen in front of what is now known as Soundstage Number 3. Chaplin produced his most well-known movies here over the next 35 years. However, he wasn't done appending Hollywood. Chaplin collaborated with D.W., Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford in 1919. Griffith to launch an entirely new venture: a film studio that is owned and operated by the artists. They referred to it as United Artists. A fifth partner was brought in to assist with business-related issues, and each of the 4 founders had a sizable portion of the company. Upon learning about it, the head of Metro Pictures famously declared, "The inmates are taking over the asylum." He wasn't mistaken. The top Hollywood stars were making the decisions for the first time. Chaplin was excited to begin working with United Artists, but there was a catch. First National refused to release him from his contract. He still had 6 films to pay them. In order to get his new business off the ground, he had to continue working under the previous contract. The Kid, one of his best-loved movies, came out in 1921. It transformed what humor might be and was his first feature-length film. A 6-year-old named Jackie Coogan performed the role of an impoverished dad who takes in an abandoned youngster. It was heartfelt as well as humorous. Nothing like it had ever been seen by anyone. The movie generated nearly $5 million at the box office despite having a high production cost of $250,000. Chaplin himself had starred in it, written it, directed it, produced it, and edited it. It was encapsulated in the poster: a photo that shows a smile and maybe a tear. Chaplin was prepared to take a chance once more in 1923. A Woman of Paris, his following movie, was different. It was dramatic and solemn, and he wasn't even involved. A brief appearance that lasted 3 seconds. Although he attempted to alert viewers in advance, many arrived anticipating the small prick. Some were enraged, and some were disappointed. Edna Purviance, Chaplin's longtime leading lady, starred in the movie. He aspired to make her famous on her own. The picture was praised by critics. The public didn't react, but Mary Pickford claimed it made her cry. It was a box office failure. Some communities even outlawed it because they believed it to be immoral. Others withdrew it after Edna was unjustly connected to a controversy in Hollywood. Charlie Chaplin was already a well-known figure in 1918 when he first met actress Mildred Harris, then just 17 years old. A hasty wedding resulted from her mistaken belief that she was pregnant. The age of Chaplin was 29. Things were difficult right away. It was obvious to him that he didn't think she was very smart. They had a lot of arguments, particularly concerning her desire to continue acting. They gave birth to a child a year later, but he passed away 3 days later. By late 1919, Chaplin had left home. The marriage was failing, but Harris maintained appearances. In 1920, claiming he was mentally harsh, she sought for divorce. According to Chaplin, she cheated on him. She even allegedly had a relationship with actress Alla Nazimova, who concealed her sexual orientation by entering a fictitious marriage. Harris died young at 43 and never achieved much fame. However, Chaplin remained the same. Lita Gray, another minor, became connected with him. Since the age of 8, he had known her. He got her pregnant while she was 16 while The Gold Rush was being filmed. In California, he might have been imprisoned. In order to avoid Gray's mother calling the authorities, Chaplin hurried into a second marriage, this one in Mexico. In addition to telling Lita that the marriage wouldn't survive and that he would make her miserable, Chaplin is said to have advised people that marriage was preferable to prison. They had 2 boys. Though he avoided her at work most of the time, he even appeared on the cover of Time magazine at that time. It was a poisonous marriage. In 1926, things went downhill. Chaplin's infidelity with Lita's best friend was discovered. Kennedy Myrna. She fled after taking the children. She subsequently filed for divorce. The ensuing scandal was among the most repulsive in early Hollywood. There were several unsettling elements in her more than 40-page complaint. She stated Chaplin made her do things she thought were repulsive and coerced her into engaging in sex acts that were against the law at the time. All married couples do it, he assured her, and she had to comply as his wife. Before they were married, he boasted about doing the same with other well-known actresses. There was a huge fallout. Newspapers were obsessed with the story. After the divorce, a record-breaking settlement was reached. Money set aside for their children and hundreds of thousands of dollars for Lita. The compensation was the largest of its kind at the time. Chaplin was not a good handler. For 8 months, there was no more circus filming. To avoid being included in the divorce proceedings, he concealed film reels. He felt a lot of stress. Some claimed he was unrecognizable without his well-known tramp attire, and his hair became white. People nationwide wanted his movies to be outlawed. His image suffered greatly. When questioned about Lita Grey years later, Chaplin was direct. With the exception of her, he claimed to adore every woman he had ever dated. Charlie Chaplin had a talent for using film to transform difficult or gloomy concepts into memorable scenes. He created the Gold Rush in 1925, partly based on the real-life Donner Party tale, in which stranded pioneers had to endure a harsh winter in the mountains, with some even turning to cannibalism. Chaplin made a famous sequence in which his character eats a boiled shoe, but he didn't explicitly depict that. He spent 3 long days filming the scene and had 20 licorice shoes constructed to make it work. Also, the nails were candy. Despite the stomach issues Chaplin and his co-star experienced from all that licorice, the outcome was memorable. He later declared that he wanted to be known for his role in the Gold Rush. In order to make it more realistic, he even hired 600 actual homeless men to portray prospectors. When the motion picture industry began transitioning to sound in 1931, Chaplin took a big chance. City Lights was a silent film that he produced. It took him more than 2 years to complete. One pivotal scene. Weeks to perfect the scene where the tramp encounters a blind flower girl. Chaplin did not entirely disregard sound. He stayed true to his specialty, visual storytelling, even if he composed his own music for the movie and included a few effects, such as a swallowed whistle. It was adored by audiences. He invited Albert Einstein to the debut. He was seated next to George Bernard Shaw in London. Nevertheless, City Lights turned out to be one of Chaplin's biggest hits. By 1936, Chaplin was prepared to take on a more ambitious project. It was a scathing, humorous critique of industrial life in modern times. In order to illustrate how industrial work dominated people's life, the movie opens with a huge clock ticking away. Even if Chaplin goes crazy on the manufacturing line in Tramp Battles machines, we still find it funny. Chaplin's voice was first heard by audiences in a ridiculous song composed entirely of gibberish. He performed nonsense in many languages based on a well-known French song. It enabled him to transition to sound movies while maintaining the physical humor that helped establish his reputation. Chaplin's most audacious picture, The Great Dictator, followed in 1940. Chaplin's scathing caricature of Adolf Hitler was produced at a time when many nations were still attempting to avoid war with Nazi Germany. He portrayed 2 characters, Adenoid Heinkel, a dictator, and a Jewish barber. He transformed German into amusing jargon to make fun of Hitler's remarks. Despite opposition, President Roosevelt urged Chaplin to proceed with the picture. The movie was an enormous hit. Chaplin later stated that he would never have survived if he had been aware of the whole truth of the concentration camps. The movie wasn't permitted to be screened in Germany until 1958. His career went off, but his personal life took a turn for the worst. The 52-year-old Chaplin began dating the 21-year-old actress Joan Barry in 1941. He was still married at the time, but he believed Barry had a special quality, so he gave her money for things like dental work and acting lessons. Although they didn't stay together, their romance left a chaotic legacy. Later, when he wasn't working, Chaplin acknowledged that he was solely interested in casual relationships. 2 of their pregnancies resulted in abortion as a result of their romance. Then things became worse. Barry started to lose his equilibrium. Armed with a gun, she threatened Chaplin when she broke into his home. He kept his door locked, according to Chaplin, but she stated they had been dating ever since. To catch his attention, she repeatedly returned, even smashing windows. Her pregnancy was 6 months along by the middle of 1943. She revealed that Chaplin was the father. The unborn child's mother even filed a lawsuit on its behalf. Carol, and Barry's daughter, was born in October. All of this was J. It was necessary for Edgar Hoover. Because of Chaplin's left-leaning political views, the FBI director had been keeping an eye on him for years. Hoover sensed an opportunity to kill him now. The government accused Chaplin of transporting Berry over state lines for unethical reasons and filed charges against him under the Mann Act. Berry visited him in New York by train in 1942, which was connected to the charge. The dramatic and widely publicized trial started in March 1944. Chaplin could have been sentenced to 23 years in jail if proven guilty, but he was acquitted on April 4. The paternity case continued to drag on even after the criminal trial concluded. Chaplin was ruled out as the father by blood tests. All three of the reputable medical professionals concurred. The science was obvious, even according to Berry's attorney. However, at the time, blood tests were not accepted as evidence in California courts. An agreement that Chaplin had signed said that if he passed the exam, the matter would be dropped. Berry, however, continued. A hung jury concluded the first trial. In 1945, he became the father of the second. Despite the lack of scientific evidence, he was nonetheless required to pay child support. His appeal was unsuccessful. This inequity spurred reform. Blood tests became admissible evidence in court as a result of the lawsuit, which also helped change America's paternity laws. Chaplin, however, had already suffered the harm. In the U.S., he never fully restored his reputation. World War II was the beginning of Charlie Chaplin's problems. He was among the world's most well-known performers at the time. However, people took notice of his vocal political opinions. At a Russian war charity banquet in 1942, he boldly declared, "I am not a communist, but I am proud to say that I feel pretty pro-communist." For years, the statement appeared repeatedly in FBI files. His previous picture, The Great Dictator, had taken a strong stance against fascism. Many Americans still supported wartime isolation, so this didn't set well with them. Attending events organized by Soviet officials and endorsing Soviet-American friendship clubs did not help Chaplin's case. His association with alleged communist sympathizers only increased the suspicion of government officials. He eventually testified that he had never read a book about communism and knew very little about it, but the harm had already been done. After the war, his prior acts were no longer viewed as backing for an ally as tensions with the Soviet Union increased. It was reframed as an indication of hazardous radicalism. As early as 1922, the FBI had been keeping an eye on Chaplin, but in 1947, when a thorough investigation was started by Edgar Hoover. Chaplin's FBI dossier, which was 1,900 pages long at the end, was filled with charges and speculations about his personal and political life. Hoover was adamant on Chaplin's deportation and disliked him, labeling him a parlor Bolshevik. His films were scrutinized by agents for communist messages. He was even put on a security index card, making him a target for detention in the event of a national emergency. The Great Dictator and Modern Times were reframed as pro-communist films. However, in spite of their best efforts, the FBI was never able to find evidence that Chaplin was a communist or engaged in espionage. They even suggested concluding the investigation by 1950, a few days before Senator McCarthy announced the start of the Red Scare. Chaplin never gave up. He steadfastly defended free speech while consistently denying that he was a communist. "They call you a communist these days if you leave the curb with your left foot." Once he made a joke. Despite the advice of his buddies to keep quiet, he refused. He saw democracy as the right to free speech. His actions included criticizing the House Un-American Activities Committee and protesting the trials of Communist Party members. He never had to testify, despite being subpoenaed, possibly due to officials' concerns about his capacity to influence public opinion. He maintained that he did not advocate communism but rather defended civil liberty. But it was all black or white during the McCarthy era. You were either an American or not. Because he didn't cleanly fall into either category, Chaplin became a target. In 1952, things reached their peak. Chaplin came to the realization that he would not be permitted to return to the United States unless he consented to being questioned about his political beliefs while traveling to England. No, he said. Rather, he chose to settle in Switzerland with his wife, O'Neill. They purchased a house in Corsier-sur-Vive, a little village close to Lake Geneva. For their expanding family, it turned into a tranquil setting. Every dinner was at 645, and Chaplin, who couldn't follow French, insisted that everyone at the table speak English. Chaplin, who was 53 at the time, married Unac when she was only 18. Although the age difference startled many, they developed a strong and enduring friendship. Unac supported him through controversy and exile. Chaplin talked on how much she meant to him a lot. He once wrote that it would make him sick to his stomach to see her go through the streets of Vie before him. They stayed together till Chaplin passed away in 1977. Following that, Una lived in isolation until her death in 1991. In exile, Chaplin continued to produce. His 1957 satire, A King in New York, took aim at American consumerism and political witch hunts. Chaplin's own experience is evidently echoed in the main character, a prince escaping upheaval, who finds himself in a shallow, paranoid caricature of America. At the age of 77, he then directed A Countess from Hong Kong, starring Sophia Loren and Marlon Brando, in 1967. It turned his old story about tramps on its head, demonstrating how rich people lose everything. Scenes from dingy dance clubs to opulent ballrooms demonstrated the social ladder through dancing in the movie. Class, alienation, and survival were themes Chaplin had examined throughout his life and were now influenced by exile in both films. Chaplin returned to the U.S. in 1972 after a 20-year absence. At the age of 82, he was uncertain of his reception. At the Academy Awards, however, the audience roared when he took the stage to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. The longest standing ovation in the history of the Oscars lasted for 12 continuous minutes. There was more than praise in that moment. It was the nation's public apology that had initially turned him off. Even though he was weak, Chaplin appeared to be touched by the Academy's recognition of him as a giant in cinema. It brought years of strife to a close. And he went back to Switzerland certain that his legacy was safe. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II 3 years later, in 1975. Because of his private life controversies and political concerns, the British government had postponed the accolade for years. Ultimately, though, his accomplishments were too significant to overlook. Chaplin had fathered 11 children from 4 marriages at that point. There were 8 of them kids with Una. His granddaughter Una, who starred in Game of Thrones, and his daughter Geraldine, who rose to fame as an actress, were among the many who pursued careers in the arts. At his Swiss home, Charlie Chaplin passed away quietly in his sleep on Christmas Day 1977. His age was 88 years. Several strokes and years of deteriorating health had left him confined to a wheelchair. His storied life came to a peaceful end, and 2 days later he was laid to rest in a modest, private ceremony. Chaplin was among the most well-known people in the history of cinema. His career spanned several decades, from the silent film era to the present day.